Mm-hmm. That's one.
Will you tell me when to start?
Just second. We're on YouTube. And just making sure Facebook is good. Second. Mm-hmm. Cool. Looks like a custom one is like funny. We'll just work with Facebook or YouTube, and yeah, we'll go from there. Cool. We're live on YouTube, so whenever you want to start.
Start? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Happy Friday. Welcome, Guimel, and welcome everyone to Poder NC's Afro Latinx Race, Culture, and Poder event, where we will be having a conversation on anti-blackness and African culture in the Latinx diaspora, organizing, and more. My name is Sarah, and our special guest tonight is Guimel Ferreira. I hope I pronounced your name right. He's a Dominican organizer at Raise Up and an NCCU alum. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be on. And you did pronounce it right, so yeah, you're good.
Cool. So we only have an hour, and thanks to the amazing Ricky who's behind the scenes, we have 5 rich and deep questions that I want to get through in this hour. So we're going to get started, if that's cool. The first one is, how do we silence racial dynamics in the Caribbean and in African cultures?
I guess I'll start with this one. I think, when we're looking at this question and we see how we silence these racial dynamics in, Caribbean African cultures, it starts off by realizing that we all come from the same place. And one of the racial dynamics that have affected us, Caribbeans, and specifically is colorism. That's one of the, I guess, major racial dynamics that we need to work on, definitely. It's impacted us Caribbeans and Caribbean islands for too long. This was something that was unfortunately ingrained in us from past dictators and oppressors, and you will see this throughout history. And we as Caribbeans need to realize that that our culture is influenced by indigenous, Spaniard, and African roots. And coming to this realization, I think, is that our cultures are similar and that one is not better than the other. I believe is a great step to silencing, I think, the greatest racial dynamic that divides us currently right now.
Yeah, totally. So why do you think we silence race, and what do we see as beneficial to doing so?
Well, I think this question is tough, and I would love to hear your guys' opinion on this, because there's so many aspects to why we silence race. You can look at this through many points of view. Some people could say it's lack of knowledge why we silence race. We avoid the topic of racism and race in our communities because lack of knowledge, I believe. I think this is something, this lack of knowledge has come to us because of how media portrays being colored or being Black or identifying as that. So this lack of knowledge has created, I guess, a form of prejudice in our communities, which we need to find a way to break this. It's this prejudice in the Latinx communities is causing us, I guess, a sort of fear that accepting our blackness, or, you know, accepting that role as a person of color rather than just identifying as white like many tend to do. Yeah, we need to find a way to break that. And I think that's one of the major reasons why we tend to silence race, is because we don't know how to talk about it. That, yeah. And that's just one aspect of it. I believe there are many views and ways we can continue that conversation.
Yeah, I definitely think of it as a snowball effect throughout history. Like first, you know, we have people come settle in lands where indigenous people reside in. That's their, you know, natural space. And then they bring enslaved individuals. And then after that, they create other forms and systems of oppression and build up these institutions. And so it's kind of just like, you know, colorism and racism is kind of entrenched in these institutions. And people often think about, you know, in America and things like that, but it also exists in our Caribbean and Latin American countries as well. So that's like one of the aspects, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Ricky, would you like to go on?
So I kind of wanted to like ask too, somewhat bouncing off what you said, Guimel, that like, you know, we come to this country, we don't know the dynamics that are in this country. And it's kind of like a good question to ask about what was our parents and grandparents' immigrant experience coming here, right? Like I know my mom and my grandmother, like on the Puerto Rican side, really wanted to assimilate, or like they were really nervous about me speaking Spanish in the house because it's like, how do you survive, right? Like my mom was really nervous about that. And it's like I've learned that there's like a whole generation of immigrants who are really, yeah, like they really push for the assimilation. I kind of wanted to unpack like what was your family's experience and yours too, Sarah, of how did your parents and grandparents like kind of approach that really complex, like here's a whole country, like yeah, my parents are very working class, retail the entire time. I haven't, and my grandmother went to school, so I don't know how like if your parents went to school, you know, here in the States, et cetera. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like unpack that dynamic.
Sir, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. I would just say that I am Dominican, Afro-Dominican. Both of my parents were, well, my father was born in Dominican Republic and he came to the United States in the 80s. And so we still have a lot of family in the DR, and most of them are, it's a mixture. On my mother's side, there are more white Latinos and stuff like that. And on my dad's side, we're kind of darker. So that's where I get, you know, my melanin from. And so it's always been difficult to explore that as, you know, an Afro Latinx woman, those intersecting identities as being Black, you know, and also my identity as being, you know, Latinx, and how that coexist together and how that also creates a conflict. One of the biggest things I think of is, you know, my natural hair and how it's taken me so long to celebrate that. Just because, you know, in the DR and also like it's prevalent in, you know, places like New York, the Dominican blowouts and always straightening your hair. So just assuming to those Eurocentric features, qualities, you know. So that's my experience. But if you want to expand more on that.
Yeah, definitely. Not gonna lie, I did blow up my hair at one point, wanted to try it, but wasn't because of that though. I really was just curious. But for me, I guess so. My father is Dominican. My mother's Puerto Rican, so I kind of have like two different perspectives to this. But I will focus, I guess, on my father's side because I know a lot more about his story. So my father came to the States because of his mother. My grandma worked very hard to get all her children here. She would work in different countries like Venezuela and even across all of South America just so she can afford to move her children up here. And I guess that when coming up here, you know, me growing up in United States and learning more about my Dominican heritage and learning more about my, I guess, my grandma and her story while she was here, it was not easy. It was very rough for them to make it here. They were very poor, and DR is very poor and still is very poor right now. So it was a struggle. And referring to, you know, I guess assimilating. I wouldn't say we never assimilated because I would say that we've always stuck to our roots. But there was this thing of my grandma did grow up in a time where being darker skinned was bad. And I kind of learned that later on in life. Thankfully, my family isn't that way, but a lot of people up there are, and I learned a lot about that. And she grew up in a time where having anything darker than me, I think I'm even pushing it when I hit summer. Uh, it wasn't looked favorably upon. And when coming down here, learning about that and learning that Dominicans tend to not identify as Black because of past history and because of how things have gone down in the past over there in DR, and which still continue till this day. Yeah, it's something that I really took a toll, because I was like, well, that's crazy, because like we all come from the same place in my point of view. We all were brought to Hispaniola, and that's going into history that will take a long time to talk about. But we were all, brought there, and we all were put in positions that we didn't want to be in. We were made slaves, and we were forced to do things that we shouldn't do. And now they're in this position of that if you're darker skinned, it's not favorable, and I think it's quite sad. So coming to the States and being here, thankfully we never conformed to that point of view of being darker skinned was a bad thing. We embrace it. We love our curly hair over here. I can never imagine myself with straight hair on this end. Tried it one time, but nah, I prefer curly. But yeah, no, thankfully we've always stuck to our roots, and especially on my mother's side as well. But I want to focus on the Dominican side, since I think that's where usually that topic tends to lead when it talks about colorism up there. Mm-hmm. What about you, Ricky?
Yeah, like you, Guimel, I'm mixed with Mexican and Puerto Rican, which ends up being a very interesting thing, though I was predominantly raised Puerto Rican and Caribbean. So most of my experiences growing up has been about Caribbean assimilation. I came through on both sides from my grandparents. So my parents were the first generation in, kind of dealing with all of the struggles that entails. And yeah, my Puerto Rican grandmother was very much hard set on like learning. They're very strongly bilingual. Like you couldn't tell one way or the other. And having the Mexican side in the family, the amount of complexities that come with that. And also learning actually, because the story of assimilation is kind of very interesting for my family, because I only recently that I realized I'm also Ecuadorian. And I didn't know that because they were so hard set on being like really Puerto Rican and just like assimilated, like you're not going to know about that side. And a lot of erasure. And that's kind of where when I wrote that question about 17 race was just a lot of, with that in mind, like there are many dynamics we don't talk about in our families, right? To both of y'all's points, I'm kind of wondering like, we have our parents, and then we have our cousins, and I know from like all three of us and like my one-on-ones with you all are like, we always have that one little cousin that's like, I'm not going to talk to y'all. Like I just can't. It's like really difficult to cross that bridge. My cousins are total Trump supporters, and I'm just like, I'm very Pentecostal, and like religion plays a huge role in the household. And yeah, so it's when you say it's complicated, it's interesting to kind of untangle what that means. We're all from Florida, all three of us, by the way. So different parts. And Florida is a whole world to unpack in itself. What we take in from that while we're here in North Carolina. And yeah, I'm very interested in like how those experiences play out in our families, the things that we see, especially as we get deeper in like movement work and like working at Bordet or working at Raise Up. It's like, thanks to the Mexican side of the family, I don't have to experience being a black sheep with organizing. Like I have family that does organizing work and everything, but it's so interesting to see other Latinos be a black sheep in their family, because the rest of their family is like super religious or super conservative. They carry the religion from the island here. They really want to like erase Spanish in their household. They want to they think that this is how you survive, and that survival aspect it's interesting because it doesn't have to be that way. And I think as we are working at Bordet, Raise Up, and all the other organizing work in North Carolina, we realized there's another way to be. Like, you don't have to just go to church and and yeah, carry all those values. You can, there's a much richer conversation to be had. But yeah.
Definitely. I'm going to move on to the next question. It is, what are some policies that can, have kind of existed and contributed to the impact of the racial divide in the DR and also in Caribbean immigrants? And also, I'm going to tag this question along. How has COVID-19 impacted these things? But I guess the first question is, what are some policies that kind of play an impact on the racial problem, the divide in those countries, such as the DR?
Well, if we're specifically talking about in the islands, you can even apply this to the States, to be honest with you. You can apply it to both. Rather than looking at a specific policy, I would say the cause of policies would be poverty. Poverty, I believe, causes a huge racial divide. I know it's a weird answer, but I think this aspect of poverty and, seeing how certain people of different complexions are more poor than others causes insane racial divide, unfortunately, because it's easier for people in the States and in Caribbean islands for people of lighter complexion to get better paying jobs, to get better opportunities than people who are of a darker skin complexion. You can even look at, I guess, the neighborhoods they live in. And it, like I said, it applies to both the islands and the States. People who tend to be of lighter complexion tend to live in better neighborhoods, while people of darker complexion tend to be in slums and in projects, especially in the DR. And if we're focusing strictly on DR, they also have this policy back in the day. Thankfully, it's still not in play now, but they had this what's the word I'm looking for? A citizenship test, basically, where if you identified as Black, you weren't a citizen of DR. So that's just examples of what's going on in the Caribbean islands, of how, they make the person feel like if you identify as Black, they make you feel ostracized because you identify that way. And they make sure that you are discriminated against because you want to be that way. So that's one of the biggest things that has been going on in Caribbean islands. And unfortunately, even though that policy is still not in place in DR, there's still that issue of Black people are still poorer than everyone else down there. You can look at Haiti. Haiti's a Black nation and it's right on the border of DR. That's one of the worst areas you can be. And it's honestly because they're Black. And I mean, it's not a popular opinion, but I think it's the truth.
That's an interesting thought. And I wanted to I'm just thinking about you could I did not know that the Dominican Republic denied citizenship on racial lines. In Puerto Rico, a lot of
that's way back in the day. Yeah.
Our migration from Puerto Rico to New York, for example, is where people think there's a lot of Boricuas. But the reason why is to de-radicalize the island. It was a different sense of the people don't talk often enough, is that there was a huge independence movement in Puerto Rico in the 40s and 50s. That was the last time that we actually stormed, some people stormed the Capitol, was Puerto Ricans fighting for their independence. And in order to de-radicalize them, they opened up borders, which is this is what they did to Cuba as well. And I guess it's an interesting relationship between poverty and race there, right? Because who can immigrate and leave the island? Cuba is a big example that most of the people who have left in the first generation during the revolution was predominantly white. Second generation, third generation are increasingly of color. In Mexico, there's plenty, in Guatemala, there's plenty of people who are indigenous, can't speak even Spanish or English, that are coming to the border. So it's interesting how poverty and race mix here, and how each country has these different set of policies that impact who is allowed to move, who's mobile, and then who's not. That's thought.
No, I think that's a very important thought actually. And yeah, like I said, poverty does play a role in being able to move down here. You need the cash flow, like you were talking about in Cuba. It was white Cubans that came down here. So yeah, I think poverty plays a big role, and of course the other policies and results of policies that plays parts in it. But like I said earlier, there's so many things and so many areas we can go into when talking about these sort of relationships, when specifically talking about Latinx communities and Caribbean communities. But I do want to address that second question, how COVID impacted. Uh, yeah, so I wouldn't know much about the DR currently after COVID. If you don't mind, I would like to talk about the States though a little bit and how that's impacted people in the States. So yeah, COVID has caused a lot of people to lose jobs. So clearly, and majority have been Black and brown folks. So there's this, I guess, problem going now where it's like Latinx communities currently in the United States are struggling to make it by. They're already struggling before COVID. So now they have to get paid less than already the minimum wage because they do under the table jobs. So now they're struggling just to even find those kind of jobs now. So it does create more of this divide of that. How could someone understand my pain when they got to realize that we're all going through the same thing right now? People tend to feel like they're the only ones going through it. And we can't be at that mindset currently because right now, all minorities, Black, brown, we're all going through it and we all need to stand up together. And COVID has impacted this poverty rate. And we need to make sure that the Latinx community knows that we got to get through this. And the only way we can get through this is by joining hands with, our Black brothers and sisters. So yeah, poverty has been rampaging in both communities right now, and this idea that we're the only ones going through it needs to be stopped, and we need to make sure that we all join together in fighting this.
You had brought up an interesting point a couple minutes ago. You're talking about poverty, the systemic problem of poverty, and equating Blackness. And so you brought up how near the Haitian and Dominican border, there is, it is one of the more impoverished areas or communities in the country. And so I was just wondering if you wanted to if you had any thoughts on the Haitian NDR problem and how the racial dynamics are there. I know that there's always conflict, and what arises from that conflict typically, unfortunately, right, is racism and colorism.
Well, by no means, I do want to give more. I am no expert in this topic, but no, I think what has been causing this conflict even till this day is honestly just past history. Like if you look at the history of Haiti and DR, it's filled with racism, war, violence, but it all started from oppression from a outside party called the Spaniards and the French. And they're the ones that caused this divide within the island of Hispaniola, where they made it that if you were considered dark-skinned, you will be part of the Haitian side. And if you conform to, I guess, or let's say had more Spaniard cultural tendencies, they'll put you on the Dominican side. And that's what started this divide between. And unfortunately, it spiraled down to wars, and it spiraled down to racist policies from Trujillo, from even before him, of how people just took advantage of each other. And that borderline right now is just you can still see the history till this day of what it's caused. Unfortunately, it's it's just Black. This is how I see it. You guys are all from the same island. I don't see a difference between a Haitian and Dominican, just maybe a different language at most. But we're all from the same island, so I don't understand this whole because you're darker than me, you're lower than me, or Yeah, it's a crazy thing going on down there, and I think it's something that needs to be addressed more, definitely. And I hope they address it more in the future. And yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think nationalism plays a big part on that too, because people take their heritage and their culture, rightfully so, very seriously. And so that also causes a divide. But we have to remember that we are, as Black individuals, a part of the diaspora. And so we have a lot in common. Even if we have, different language, different food, different cultures, histories, we have a lot of things that are in common and that we are connected. So in that struggle, we struggle together and we fight together. That's how I see it. Cool. So what values can happen by having these discussions like this, and what structures can change to help? So like, what can we get out of this discussion moving forward?
Honestly, I think it's just learning from each other. Like I said earlier, I think lack of knowledge tends to play a big part. So gaining knowledge and just understanding everyone's point of view. I would love if, in the future, other people of different nationalities or different Hispanic backgrounds come and talk about their point of view. Because I know we got Dominicans and Puerto Ricans, and I know Ricky's half Mexican, so we got it all basically here, the big three in my opinion. But these conversations like this, it just continues, I guess, opening, our eyes and knowledge on how we can make the world a better place, and especially for Latinx communities. Let's hear you guys talk about that.
Ricky, you can go ahead and expand if you'd like. Love hearing your thoughts.
I just wanted to still bounce on I'm still really the knowledge I've learned about the laws in the Dominican Republic, but how they are connected to poverty as well. We talked, I think I've mentioned to you all on different occasions that Haiti has the most NGOs per capita in the whole world, and they don't have much of a functioning government, and the IMF is everything when it comes to their policies. It's how they think about it, and having a bank be your regulatory and lawmaking kind of interests is a very hard struggle. And I see how that then compounds and heightens all of the racial dynamics as well, right? That heightens any divisions like nationalism or racism or colorism, and all whatever those divisions are, they get heightened even more, especially when survival is on the line. I've noticed that with the assimilation conversation, right? We assimilate to survive, but that also means accepting and enabling, empowering that division, right? Learning English, trying to associate with those who are lighter skinned, trying to straighten your hair, don't grow out your hair. I don't know, from small things to large things. It does come down to that relationship we have with poverty, and how then we have all these entanglements that come from that, right? All these struggles that then stem from that. And in North Carolina in particular, how is the organizing with the Latino community in Raise Up? Because Raise Up is very union-based, working class base that you all have. I know statewide is kind of the strategy eventually in time. I think we're all on to expand outward. But yeah, what is your thoughts about that relationship with working class families here in North Carolina, especially since COVID happened too? I imagine there's some experiences you could speak on, G, with working people impacted.
Yeah.
Maybe Cyber City, I believe.
So say the question one more time.
No, just expanding on how COVID has impacted the working class Latino community here, especially, and kind of unpacking that, through the lens of Raise Up, through the lens of the organizing side of your work.
Got you. Yeah, definitely the organizing side of doing Raise Up. Yeah, COVID-19 has impacted workers tremendously of all races and ethnicities. So far, people are not having jobs. People are getting paid less, and that the impact of it is that people are losing homes. People are going hungry. Thankfully, we've gotten projects started. We're working on other things, and we have food drives going. And yeah, we're just trying our best to help the community in this aspect. We have Fed Up that we do with CJJ and the Poor People's Campaign, and we do that in Durham just so we can bring food out to families, because we know that people of all kinds are being impacted by COVID-19. They don't have enough to put food on the table, and when you're in the richest country in the world, that's kind of sad. So and when the last time I was in Siler City, one of the actions we did, it was because people are being mistreated there. Like during this pandemic, I guess bosses and owners of companies have taken it upon themselves to treat their workers worse and worse and worse because they think they can get away with it more now. We have chicken plants in Siler City where they're forcing Latinx community to work under these harsh conditions without masks. And if someone catches COVID, they don't let anyone else know. They just continue making them work for these low wages, and people get sick and die. People have died in chicken plants. People have died doing these kind of jobs that Latinx folk have to work. So the impact that COVID-19 has caused the working family in general is insane. But especially in the Latinx community, it has caused a lot of pain and even like loss of homes, even death to certain points. So yeah, that's what I guess what I do as an organizer. We do this to make sure that workers of all kind, documented or undocumented, are protected, because no one should have to go through that. It shouldn't be an issue to be safe at work. It shouldn't be an issue to get paid right. It shouldn't be an issue to have food on your table. These shouldn't be issues. These are rights that should be mandatory. It's not something that it's not something I should need to fight for, but unfortunately that's what we have to do, and that's the situation we're in. But yeah, COVID has caused these impacts on the working family. So yeah.
Yeah, I like how you pointed out that we shouldn't have to fight for help and, to have these resources to us just because, our lives, every single life matters, especially under these conditions. And so obviously, since we have to fight for these institutions like the federal and local government to provide us for this, I think it just emphasizes that we need a strong community support and organizing on all levels, from young people to old people and everything in between, that we just, we rely on each other, because literally we got us. I think of, Texas right now, that, they're kind of in a bind because they didn't have the infrastructure to handle this, weather storm, and which is a product of climate change. And, their government systems aren't helping out. So what's going on? We have different organizations and people and local businesses helping out within the community, just because, really at the end of the day, we got us, we got each other. So that's what I think of for that. So that was a good point you brought up. I can move on to the next and final question if anybody else has anything to add. No? Cool. All right. So what are some resources people can go to start learning about their African roots? So I'm thinking books, movies, documentaries, speeches. Like, what do you got for us that people can start doing some research?
Well, my answer might be a little basic.
No.
Listen. The way I learned it, when I was in Central, I had this great professor called Dr. Nato. He introduced me to a lot of my African roots, and the way it happened was that man sent me bunches of books firstly, but he also made me read about my history. He made me read Dominican history. He made me read Puerto Rican history, and the fastest way to do that, I mean, to start off with Wikipedia. I know that's not a popular answer, but yeah, Google it. Google about, you know, where you come from. Google about before they were, if before they were colonized by the Europeans or the Americans. Google it. I think that's like the best way to do it. I read about Hispaniola. I read about how these indigenous people on these islands, you know, they had it all. They really had it all. They had everything going for them. But you know, unfortunately, the Europeans came over and kind of messed that all up. But yeah, just that's where I learned about my African roots, and reading about, you know, indigenous roots as well, because both apply in this case, my African and indigenous roots, because they were all mixed together. As I said earlier, you know, our cultures tend to be mixed of bunches of everything, and just reading up on that, books, especially, and articles. You'll find great articles online talking about, you know, how it was back in the day. So yeah, I don't know many movies though. I would love to know more about good movies, but
I got like a little library, no matter what, for like everything.
no, I've seen your library. It's pretty impressive.
a lot of years. But yeah, I mean, the thing about the indigenous question is like very interesting because, you know, in Mexico, there is still in their constitution indigenous languages like that are recognized in their constitution, but you couldn't really do the same for the Dominican or Republic, Cuba, or Puerto Rico. Like their Tainos are just not there anymore. Like they're completely erased. Um, and so only recently, I feel like, I mean, I got a book recently that I can definitely share in the comments or the posts for the event. Just like new, recent, very recent history on the Tainos and very recent studies that we have on the way of life and what, you know, from the different astronomy and astrologies that they have compared to ours. Like, you know, I'm a Sagittarius here, and I was kind of almost like an American astrology, but in Taino astrology, they have totally different animals, totally different relationships to land and fishery that we still are just untangling now. There's a really cool podcast called Orígenes that this one PhD student is doing on Caribbean indigenous just study and anthropology and history. It's with Cuba as a focus, but when it talks about indigenous groups, it's like this comes from Venezuela. It comes actually from over there. It comes from like the, you know, the mainland and how they got to the various islands in the Caribbean. It's really interesting. It's really interesting stuff. But yeah, it is sad that we're like only now trying to untangle this mystery. Only now we're like, and that does go with poverty too. I mean, what resources do these countries have to invest in archaeology, to invest in, you have to, if you have a choice as a country between developing apartments and buildings and, or, like pleasing the IMF thing, like that loan that y'all had to get, or dig for artifacts of ancient people, like I said, like that poverty aspect then creates again more divisions, one rolling after another. But yeah, I think that's a great start to have, like that book and that podcast. And um, I'm trying to think if like there's something else, but if there is, I'll like mention. It's probably like another 10 books and like, but it is hard to find resources as well before 1898, like the Spanish American War. That's really actually very difficult to find. It's like I've noticed recently that there's like a big gap in history between when Columbus hit and then all 1898, when all of them are like, wait, what happened for like 400 years? like, like things don't just like pop up. We didn't just become impoverished, like we didn't just like boom, like here we're poor. Like that's a multi-generational process and completely viciously understudied, I would say. And entangling in that is a long process. So yeah, it does start with the simple Googling, does start with the library. It does start, and a lot of the things that are studied in DR and Puerto Rico are like still in Spanish. They're not translated. The relationship between those universities and Central or UCF, where I went to school, or UNC Charlotte, is actually very complex. I've had people come from, got their degree in Puerto Rico, they come to the States and it's not relevant. It's like they have to like start all over because the credits don't transfer, none of it, like, which is a wild division.
Yeah, I would second that. I remember when I was doing my Latin American history, I guess final paper on a DR in Haiti, I read a lot of resources in Spanish. Thankfully, I can read Spanish, but yeah, they would not want to translate it to English. So yeah, I second that tremendously.
I guess just to add my 2 cents of what resources there on Amazon Prime, there's this docuseries called Black in Latin America, where the host, his name is Skip Gates. I'm looking at the page right now. He just explores the history of different places, such as in Haiti, Cuba, Brazil, Peru, and how the African culture had developed there, how Black people had developed their culture and had celebrated their culture, and also and their roots, rather, and also the conflict that has arisen from that. So revolutions and just trying to fight for a rightful place in the land that they live in. So that's also a great resource. It's called Black in Latin America. Also, we do have the Poder Library, where we are adding books every so often. So I think a great commitment to make for myself, Ricky, the whole team, is to add just more books on Blackness and African culture, and exploring your African roots, and just more literature on that, and also fictional books on that. Because I know there's a lot of writers. I'm thinking about Elizabeth Acevedo, which I met a couple years back in high school, and she talks about how she shows up in her identity as an Afro Latinx woman. So just dedicating more visibility for those authors would be a great resource. All right. Any final thoughts? We wrap up. I think this was a great conversation. I don't know about y'all.
I thought it was great. I would love to continue talking more about this. I think there's a lot of things we continue talking about in this conversation of Latinx communities and African culture, and just, Latinx organized. Yeah, there's a lot we can go into, and I think the more we talk about it, the more people in our communities will become more open to being more involved. So yeah.
Definitely. Thank you so much, G, for joining us today. I hope that we can take away from this conversation, everybody that's watching, is just learning some more, taking the time to learn about our history and what makes us beautiful as people. And so we can start to create some real change. I think that'd be cool. So thank you so much, G, and thank you, Ricky, for tonight in this talk.
Thank you guys for inviting me.